Lieutenant Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon, watching the distress signal flash across his screen. He had been in space for 3 years now, but something about this call felt different. The signal came from a Valeth royal vessel, and everyone knew that getting involved with alien royalty meant trouble. Captain Daniel Grant studied the readings with a frown on his weathered face. The Valeth Empire was powerful, controlling 3 star systems near human space. They had been cautious allies at best, keeping humans at arm's length for the past decade. Now their princess was in danger, and Earth's newest ship was the only one close enough to help. "Get us there fast," Grant ordered. "If that princess dies on our watch, we might be looking at a war instead of an alliance." Jake felt his stomach tighten as the ship jumped to faster-than-light speed. He was just a pilot and engineer, not a diplomat. He had joined the space program to explore, to see new worlds, to escape the small town in Kansas where nothing ever happened. Now he was racing toward a situation that could change everything between humans and aliens. The Valeth ship appeared on their screens 15 minutes later. It was beautiful in a strange way, all curves and crystal-like surfaces that caught the light from the nearby star, but it was also clearly damaged. Scorch marks covered the hull and pieces of debris floated around it like a cloud of metal snow. "Pirates," Grant muttered. They hit the ceremonial escort and ran when they saw us coming. The USS Horizon docked carefully with the damaged vessel. Jake was part of the first team to board, along with the ship's doctor and a security squad. Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw inside. The Valeth were tall and elegant, with skin that ranged from pale lavender to deep purple. They had large eyes that seemed to see everything, and their movements were graceful even in panic. But right now, the crew was anything but graceful. They were screaming, crying, running in circles around their medical bay. At the center of the chaos lay a young woman on a silver table. Her skin was a soft violet color, and she wore clothes that shimmered like starlight. Blood pooled beneath her, but it wasn't red like human blood. It was a deep purple that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. A Valeth physician rushed toward them, his 3 eyes wide with desperation. The translator device on Jake's belt crackled to life, turning the alien's words into English. "Princess Saraith is dying," the physician said. "The pirates destroyed our blood supply. Her injuries require transfusion immediately, but her bloodline is rare. Nothing we have is compatible." The human doctor, a woman named Helen Carter, stepped forward quickly. She scanned the princess with her medical device and shook her head. "I don't know enough about Valeth biology to help. Our blood types are completely different." "What about human blood?" Jake heard himself ask. The words came out before he could think about them. Everyone turned to stare at him. Captain Grant's expression was stern, warning Jake to be careful. The Valeth physician's 3 eyes seemed to focus on him all at once. "Impossible," the physician said. "No species has ever been compatible with royal Valeth blood. The cellular structures are too different. If we tried, both the donor and the princess would die from rejection." But Jake had spent his free time over the past 3 years studying alien biology. It was a hobby, something to do during the long trips between stars. He had read the early medical reports from the first human Valeth contact. He remembered seeing similarities in their blood chemistry, things that the official reports had mentioned but not explored deeply. "Test mine," Jake said firmly. He rolled up his sleeve before anyone could stop him. "Just test it. What do we have to lose?" Captain Grant grabbed his arm. "Lieutenant, do you understand what you're doing? If this goes wrong, it could create a diplomatic disaster. The Valeth might think we're trying to harm their princess. And if we do nothing, she dies anyway," Jake replied. "Then they'll definitely blame us." The Valeth physician looked between them, clearly desperate. Finally, he nodded and took a small device from his medical kit. He pressed it against Jake's arm, and a tiny needle drew a few drops of blood. The physician rushed to his equipment and mixed Jake's blood with a sample from the princess. The room fell completely silent. Everyone watched the small vial where the 2 blood samples met. Jake expected to see them separate or bubble or do something violent. Instead, they blended together smoothly, turning from red and purple into a color he had never seen before. The physician made a sound that the translator couldn't interpret. His hands shook as he ran the test again, then a 3rd time. Each time the result was the same. "Compatible," the physician whispered. "Perfectly compatible. This is impossible. This has never happened in 3,000 years of Valeth history. Things moved very fast after that." Jake was strapped to a medical chair next to the princess. Tubes connected his arm to hers, and he watched his red blood flow through clear pipes toward her body. The Valeth medical equipment hummed and beeped around them, monitoring everything. The princess's color began to return almost immediately. Her breathing, which had been shallow and rapid, started to steady. Jake felt oddly tired, but the physician assured him this was normal. They only needed to take enough blood to stabilize her. But then something strange happened. Jake felt a warmth spreading through his chest like he had swallowed hot coffee on a cold morning. It grew stronger and stronger until it almost hurt. He gasped, and the Valeth physician's eyes went wide with horror. "The bond," the physician said. "By all the ancient stars, the bond is forming." "What bond?" Captain Grant demanded. "What's happening to my officer?" The physician was already disconnecting the tubes, working faster than Jake had ever seen anyone move. "It's an old law, ancient magic, some say. When royal blood mixes perfectly with another's, a connection forms between them. It ties their lives together." Jake suddenly felt something brush against his thoughts like a whisper in a language he didn't speak. He looked at Princess Saraeth and saw her golden eyes flutter open. She stared directly at him, and he knew with absolute certainty that she could feel him too. Not just his presence in the room, but his confusion, his fear, and underneath it all, his relief that she was alive. "What does this mean?" Jake asked quietly. The Valeth physician looked at Captain Grant with an expression that clearly said this was far beyond a simple medical emergency. "It means, Captain, that your officer and our princess are now bound by blood and fate. According to our most ancient laws, such a bond can only be resolved in two ways: sacred marriage or ceremonial death." The room erupted in chaos. The human security team started shouting questions. The Valeth attendants began wailing and pulling at their hair. Captain Grant's face turned red, and Jake knew the captain was calculating just how badly this would damage human-Valeth relations, but Jake barely heard any of it. He was too focused on the sensation of another consciousness touching his own. Princess Saraeth sat up slowly, one hand pressed to her chest as if she felt the same strange warmth. She spoke in her own language, and the translator turned her words into English. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "Lieutenant Jake Morrison, ma'am," he replied. "From Earth? You saved my life, I guess I did." "Why?" She looked genuinely confused. "You didn't know me. You didn't know if it would work. You could have died." Jake thought about that. Why had he stepped forward? He could have stayed quiet and let the situation resolve itself. But he had seen someone dying and known he might be able to help. It really was that simple. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. Princess Saraeth stared at him for a long moment, and through the strange connection between them, Jake felt her surprise and something else he couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. The moment was shattered by the arrival of more Valeth ships. The royal flagship appeared on the scanners, massive and intimidating. Within an hour, Captain Grant and Jake were summoned aboard to face the Valeth Emperor himself. Emperor Kareth was old and imposing. With deep purple skin and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul, he sat on a throne that floated in the center of a grand chamber, surrounded by advisors and guards. "Lieutenant Morrison," the Emperor said, his voice like rolling thunder, "you have done something unprecedented. You have saved my daughter's life and created a blood bond that has not been seen for 8 centuries. Our laws are clear about such bonds." Jake stood at attention, feeling like a kid called to the principal's office. "I understand there are consequences, Your Majesty. I accept responsibility for my actions. Do you understand what the blood bond means?" The Emperor leaned forward. "You and my daughter are now connected. What one feels, the other senses. Where one goes, the other must follow. This is not a simple friendship or alliance. This is a joining of fates." Through the bond, Jake suddenly felt Princess Saraeth's presence. She was somewhere else in the ship, probably in her own chambers, but he could sense her anxiety and her determination. She was trying to tell him something, to warn him. But the connection was too new for clear communication. "I'm beginning to understand." "Your Majesty," Jake said carefully. "Then you understand that our law gives us only 2 choices," the Emperor continued. "You must marry my daughter, joining your life to—" The Valeth homeworld was nothing like Earth. Jake pressed his face against the window of his quarters as the ship approached the planet, watching 3 moons hang in a purple sky. The surface below was covered in red deserts dotted with cities that looked like they were made entirely of crystal and light. He had barely slept during the 48-hour journey. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt Princess Seraith's presence through the bond. Sometimes it was just a vague sense of her location on the ship. Other times emotions would flood through the connection. Her worry, her frustration, and occasionally something that felt like curiosity directed at him. They hadn't been allowed to meet during the journey. The Valith had strict protocols about blood bonds, and apparently keeping them separated until the High Council could examine them was part of the tradition. Jake had spent the time with Ambassador Catherine Walsh, a stern woman who had been rushed to the flagship to help manage the diplomatic crisis. "You need to understand what you're walking into," Walsh had told him yesterday. "The Valith Empire is old, Lieutenant. They have customs and laws that go back thousands of years. To them, you're not just a human who saved a princess. You're a disruption to the natural order." "I was just trying to help," Jake had said for what felt like the 100th time. "I know, but intention doesn't matter much in politics." Walsh had pulled up a display showing the Valith power structure. The Emperor has 3 main advisors on the High Council, but the real power belongs to 9 council members who represent different factions. High Chancellor Vexal leads the Traditionalist faction, and he's already making noise about how your presence insults Valith purity. Now, as the ship landed on Valith Prime, Jake tried to remember everything Walsh had taught him. He was escorted by silent guards through corridors that seemed to shift colors as he walked. The palace was massive, with ceilings so high they disappeared into shadows and walls that glowed with soft bioluminescent light. They took him to a room in the diplomatic wing. It was beautiful, but clearly a prison. The door sealed behind him with a soft hiss, and Jake found himself alone with his thoughts and the constant awareness of Princess Seraith somewhere else in the enormous palace. 3 days passed in that room. Servants brought him food that looked strange but tasted surprisingly good. He had a view of the crystal city below, watching alien people go about their lives. Through the bond, he could feel Seraith's frustration growing. She was being kept in isolation too, and she didn't like it any more than he did. On the 4th day, guards came for him. The High Council chamber was even more impressive than Jake had imagined. 9 thrones floated in a semicircle, each one occupied by a Valith council member in elaborate robes. Emperor Kareth sat on a 10th throne, elevated above the others. And on the opposite side of the chamber, Princess Seraith knelt on the floor, her hands bound with what looked like chains made of light. Jake felt a surge of anger through the bond. She hated being restrained like a criminal. He sent back what he hoped was a calming presence, trying to tell her they needed to stay calm and play by the rules if they wanted to survive this. "Lieutenant Jake Morrison," Emperor Kareth's voice filled the chamber. "You stand before the High Council of the Valith Empire. You are accused of violating the sanctity of royal blood. How do you answer?" Jake had practiced this moment with Ambassador Walsh, but actually being here was different. 9 pairs of alien eyes stared down at him, and he could feel the weight of thousands of years of tradition pressing down on his shoulders. "Your Majesty, I answer that I saved a life," Jake said clearly. "In my culture, that's the highest honor a person can achieve. I didn't know about your blood bond customs. I just saw someone dying and knew I might be able to help." A council member on the left leaned forward. High Chancellor Vexal, Jake recognized from Walsh's briefing. His expression was hostile and his voice was sharp when he spoke. "You presume to judge our customs by your primitive standards. The royal bloodline has remained pure for 3,000 years. Your contamination threatens everything we hold sacred." Contamination? Jake felt his temper rising despite Walsh's warnings to stay diplomatic. "Your princess was dying. Your own doctor said there was no compatible blood available. I offered mine because it was the right thing to do. If your customs say saving a life is wrong, then maybe your customs need to change." The chamber erupted in angry shouting. Several council members stood from their thrones, gesturing wildly. Ambassador Walsh, sitting in a corner with Captain Grant and the Earth delegation, put her head in her hands. Jake realized he had just made a terrible mistake, but then Princess Seraith spoke for the first time. "Father, the High Council, please listen." Her voice cut through the chaos. Everyone fell silent. "Lieutenant Morrison speaks from ignorance, yes, but also from truth. Our laws exist to protect us, but do they serve us if they prevent us from accepting help when we need it most?" "The law is the law," Vexal snapped. "It does not bend for convenience or sentiment. Then let us examine what the law actually says. Another council member spoke. This was an elderly female named Counselor Miraeth, whom Walsh had identified as the keeper of traditions. The blood bond has not manifested in living memory, but our oldest texts speak of it clearly. It is not a curse or a violation. It is a test. A test of what? Emperor Kareth asked. Of character and intention, Miraeth replied. The bond forms only when blood compatibility is perfect, and the act of giving is done without selfish motive. It tests whether two beings from different worlds can truly become one in purpose and spirit. You speak of fairy tales, Vexal said dismissively. I speak of law as ancient as this empire, Miraeth countered, and the law provides a way to verify the bond's authenticity, the trial of shared suffering. If Lieutenant Morrison and Princess Seraeth can endure it together, the bond is genuine and must be honored. If they fail, then the severance ceremony proceeds. Jake felt a spike of fear through the bond. Princess Seraeth knew what this trial involved, and her terror told him it was not going to be pleasant. The trial has not been invoked in 800 years, another council member said slowly. Many who attempted it died or were driven mad. But it is law, Miraeth insisted, and it gives them a chance to prove themselves rather than executing them based on prejudice. The council argued for hours. Jake and Seraeth remained kneeling on the cold floor, the bond between them pulsing with shared anxiety. Finally, Emperor Kareth raised his hand for silence. The trial of shared suffering will commence at dawn tomorrow, the Emperor declared. Lieutenant Morrison, Princess Seraeth, you will face 3 challenges together. Survive them and prove your bond genuine, and I will grant you both life and freedom to choose your path. Fail, and the severance ceremony will proceed as scheduled. Guards escorted Jake back to his quarters. Ambassador Walsh was allowed to visit him briefly. Do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into? She asked, though her tone was more worried than angry. Not really, Jake admitted. What's this trial going to involve? I've been researching it since Miraeth mentioned it. Walsh pulled up her datapad. Historical records are sparse, but from what I can find, it's designed to test whether 2 bonded individuals can function as one. Physical challenges, mental tests, emotional endurance. And here's the worst part. You can't communicate verbally during the trial. You have to rely entirely on the blood bond. Jake sat down heavily on the bed. I barely understand how the bond works. How am I supposed to rely on it completely? You'll have tonight to figure it out, Walsh said. I suggest you spend it trying to communicate with the princess. Practice using the bond intentionally instead of just feeling random emotions. After Walsh left, Jake lay on his bed and closed his eyes. He focused on the warmth in his chest where the bond seemed to live. He tried to reach out deliberately, to send a coherent thought rather than just vague feelings. Can you hear me? He thought as clearly as possible. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he felt a response, still more emotion than words, but clearer than before. Surprise, hope, and then something that felt like, yes. They practiced through the night, learning to communicate without words. It was difficult and exhausting. Jake learned that strong emotions came through easily, but complex thoughts were harder. Images worked better than words. Seraeth could send him mental pictures of places in the palace, and he could respond with memories of Earth. Slowly, a conversation emerged from the chaos. She showed him what the trial would involve. 3 challenges in an arena, each testing a different aspect of their connection. She was terrified, not just for herself but for him. She sent an image of previous attempts at the trial, ending in death or madness. Jake sent back determination. He showed her memories of his training, of difficult situations he had survived. He tried to convey that he was not going to give up, that they would face this together. As dawn approached, Jake felt something shift in the bond. It grew stronger, more stable. He realized they were synchronizing, learning to work as a team even though they had barely spoken to each other in person. The guards came for him as the first rays of alien sunlight touched the crystal city. They led him through the palace to a massive arena carved. The arena floor stopped moving, and before them appeared a massive maze made of crystal walls. Jake could see through the transparent barriers to the center, where 2 cups of water sat on a pedestal. The challenge looked simple enough until High Chancellor Vexel's voice echoed across the arena. You have 15 minutes to reach the center together and drink from the cups, but be warned, The walls drain body heat on contact. Touch one for more than a moment and you will freeze. The maze reconfigures itself every 30 seconds based on Valeth mathematical principles that no human could possibly understand. Jake studied the maze, his engineering training kicking in automatically. He started looking for patterns in how the walls shifted, trying to calculate the best path. But Vexal was right. The mathematics behind the movements were completely alien to anything he had learned on Earth. The walls moved in spirals and curves that made no logical sense to his human brain. He felt panic starting to rise in his chest, but then Saraith's presence touched his mind through the bond. She sent him a feeling of calm and something else, trust. She was telling him that she couldn't solve this alone either. The maze was designed to require both their minds working together. Jake took a deep breath and opened himself fully to the bond. It was terrifying, like dropping all his mental defenses and letting someone else into his head. But Saraith was there, and instead of invading his thoughts, she merged with them. Suddenly, he saw the maze differently. Through her eyes, through her understanding, the mathematical patterns made sense. He could feel how the walls would shift next, could predict the spirals. At the same time, she accessed his human ability to spot structural weaknesses and think in 3 dimensions. They moved without speaking, each taking a different path that somehow complemented the other. When a wall shifted toward Saraith, Jake felt it through the bond before she did and sent a warning. When he needed to time a jump through a closing gap, her mathematical precision guided his muscles. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the human and the princess navigated the maze like they had trained together for years. They met at the center with 2 minutes to spare, each drinking from their cup while thousands of Valeth murmured in surprise. The first challenge was complete. Jake barely had time to catch his breath before the arena floor opened beneath them. They dropped together onto separate platforms that descended into darkness. As they sank deeper, bioluminescent walls lit up around them, revealing the nature of the second test. Counselor Miraeth's voice echoed through the pit. The challenge of shared pain. What one feels, the other must endure. Proof that your bond makes you stronger, not weaker. You have 10 minutes. Jake saw the device on his platform, a machine designed to inflict pain through neural stimulation. On Saraith's platform across the pit, he could see her own version of the same device. Through the bond, he felt her understanding of how it worked. The total amount of pain would remain constant, but they could shift it between themselves, choosing who suffered more. The trial started gently. A burning sensation spread along Jake's arms. Through the bond, he felt Saraith experiencing the same pain. Then her device activated and suddenly his back felt like someone was dragging hot knives across it. He gasped and fell to one knee. I can take more, Saraith's thought came clear and urgent. My people are more resistant to this type of pain. Let me carry most of it. No, Jake sent back firmly. That defeats the purpose. This is about sharing, not one of us being a martyr, but you're human. Your pain tolerance isn't as developed. Then help me develop it, Jake thought stubbornly. We share this equally, so they did. As the pain increased over the following minutes, they learned to distribute it between them in real time. When one approached their breaking point, the other took on a larger share for a moment. Saraith's courage flowed through the bond, strengthening Jake's endurance. His stubborn refusal to quit fed her determination. The pain became almost unbearable. Jake's vision blurred with tears, and through the bond he felt Saraith shaking. But something remarkable was happening. The bond itself seemed to filter the suffering. Experiencing it together made it more bearable than either could have managed alone. They drew strength from each other's resilience, creating a loop of mutual support. When the 10 minutes finally ended, both were on their knees, breathing hard. But they were still conscious, still connected. Even High Chancellor Vexal looked impressed, though he tried to hide it. The platforms rose back to the arena floor. Jake and Saraith were given a few moments to recover, guards bringing them water. Through the bond, Jake felt Saraith's exhaustion and something else, a growing sense of partnership. They were truly working as one now. The third challenge appeared, and Jake's heart sank when he saw what it involved. They were seated facing each other, close enough to touch but forbidden to do so. Between them, a holographic display activated, and Emperor Kareth's voice filled the arena. The challenge of shared truth. The bond gives you access to each other's thoughts and feelings. But can you accept the truth of who you each are? Your fears, your failures, your darkest moments will be revealed to each other and to this assembly. If either of you rejects what you see, the bond will break and you both will die. Jake felt his stomach drop. He had secrets, things he was ashamed of, memories he tried to forget. Now they would all be displayed for Saraith and thousands of strangers to see. The holographic display flickered to life, pulling images directly from his mind. The audience watched as his memories played out in vivid detail. They saw the combat mission where his friend Chris Palmer had died. Jake had been piloting the transport ship, and when pirates attacked, he had chosen to save the main ship instead of going back for Chris's damaged fighter. The decision had saved 20 people but cost Chris his life. The display showed Jake's guilt, his nightmares, the way he woke up screaming some nights. It showed his belief that he was a coward who had survived by letting someone braver die. Through the bond, Jake felt Saraith receiving every moment of his shame, experiencing his self-doubt and fear. The display continued, showing more. His failed relationship with a woman named Lisa back on Earth. How he had pushed her away because he was afraid of being close to anyone. His deep-seated belief that he was meant to be alone, that he would only hurt anyone who got too close. Jake wanted to close his eyes, to hide from Saraith's judgment. But he forced himself to keep watching, to own his failures. Through the bond, he felt her emotions shift as she saw his darkest moments. But instead of disgust or disappointment, he felt something unexpected. Understanding. Then the display switched to Saraith's memories, and Jake found himself experiencing her life through her eyes. He saw her as a young girl, watching her mother die during a political assassination. He felt her confusion and terror, the way she blamed herself for not being able to save her mother. The display showed her father's grief and how the Emperor had buried himself in work, leaving Saraith essentially alone despite being surrounded by servants and tutors. He experienced her fear of becoming Empress, her certainty that she wasn't strong enough or smart enough to rule. The display showed countless moments where she had doubted herself in council meetings, where she had smiled and nodded while inside she felt like a fraud. It revealed her loneliness in a court full of people who wanted something from her but never really saw her. And then it showed her deepest fear, that the blood bond was the only reason anyone would ever truly care about her, that without it she would remain alone forever, just a princess in a crystal palace with no one who really understood her. Jake felt tears running down his face. He had thought Saraith's life was perfect, that being a princess meant having everything. But she was just as broken as he was, just as afraid of being alone, just as certain of her own inadequacy. Through the bond, their emotions mingled and merged. Instead of judgment, they felt recognition. They were both flawed, both struggling with guilt and self-doubt. But seeing each other's pain made their own pain feel less isolating. "I don't reject you," Jake sent through the bond with complete honesty. "Your fears don't make you weak. They make you real. They make you someone worth knowing. And yours don't make you a coward," Saraith sent back, her thought warm with emotion. "You made an impossible choice and saved lives. The fact that it still hurts you proves you're not the coward you think you are." The holographic display flickered and died. The arena fell completely silent. Jake and Saraith sat facing each other, tears streaming down both their faces. The bond between them stronger than it had ever been. Counselor Miraeth rose from her seat, and Jake saw that she was crying too. In 800 years, no one has passed all 3 challenges. The bond is genuine. These two have proven themselves. Even High Chancellor Vexel couldn't argue against what everyone had witnessed. The crowd began to murmur, then to cheer. Jake and Saraith had survived the impossible. Emperor Kareth descended from his platform and approached them. His expression was complex, mixing pride in his daughter with concern for what came next. "You have proven yourselves beyond doubt," the Emperor said. "The bond is genuine and must be honored. But now comes the harder question." The first month on Valeth Prime was the strangest time of Jake's life. He woke up every morning in quarters that were beautiful but foreign, with 3 moons visible through his window instead of 1. Every meal was an adventure in trying to identify what he was eating. And through it all, the bond hummed constantly in the back of his mind, connecting him to Princess Saraith even when they were in different parts of the massive palace. They had decided to take the year seriously, to really try to understand each other and their connection. Jake was assigned tutors who taught him about Valeth history and culture. He learned that the Empire was old, thousands of years older than any human civilization. He learned about the 7 colony worlds that made up the empire, each with its own customs and political factions. Sarah Eth, in turn, began learning about Earth. Ambassador Walsh brought her recordings and books, showing her humanity's history and cultures. Jake would feel her surprise and confusion through the bond when she encountered concepts that didn't exist in Valeth society, like democracy or individual property ownership. They met for dinner every evening in a neutral space between their quarters. At first, the conversations were awkward, both of them trying too hard to be polite. But as weeks passed, they relaxed into something more natural. "Your people fight so much," Saraith observed one evening over a meal of something that tasted vaguely like chicken. "Earth's history is full of wars and conflicts." "Yeah, we're not great at getting along," Jake admitted, "but we're learning. And honestly, it seems like Valeth has its own political problems. The council factions are constantly fighting for power." "That's different," Sarah Ith said. "We fight with words and politics, not weapons." "Is it really so different?" Jake asked. "Seems to me that power struggles are power struggles, whether you use swords or speeches." Sarah Ith considered this, and through the bond, Jake felt her surprise at the idea. She had never thought about it that way before. These small moments of connection added up over time. Jake began to see Sarah Ith not as an alien princess, but as a person trying to do her best in an impossible situation. She was intelligent and hardworking, spending her days in council meetings and managing complex political situations. But she was also funny in a dry way, and she loved music, often humming strange Valeth melodies while she worked. Through the bond, Sarah Ith saw Jake's dedication and curiosity. He threw himself into learning about Valeth culture, asking questions that sometimes made his tutors uncomfortable. He approached everything with an engineer's mind, wanting to understand how things worked and why. And he had a kindness to him that surprised her, always taking time to thank servants and guards who others barely noticed. 3 months into the year, Jake had an idea. He noticed that the border colonies between human and Valeth space were struggling with resource distribution. Neither empire wanted to take full responsibility, so the colonies got caught in bureaucratic problems while people suffered. "What if we did something about it?" Jake suggested to Saraith one evening. "About what?" "The border colonies. We could create a joint task force, use both human and Valeth resources to actually solve the problems instead of arguing about whose responsibility it is." Sarah Ith looked thoughtful. Through the bond, Jake felt her mind working through the political implications. "It could work," she said slowly. "My father has been looking for ways to improve relations with humanity. A successful joint project would be valuable." They spent the next month developing the proposal, working together late into the night. Jake handled the technical aspects while Sarah Ith navigated the politics. They presented it to the council and, after some debate, got approval to start a pilot program. The work brought them closer together. They developed a rhythm, anticipating each other's needs and thoughts even without the bond. Jake would start a sentence and Sarah Ith would finish it. She would have a problem and Jake would offer a solution before she even asked. Ambassador Walsh noticed the change. "You're falling for her," she said bluntly one afternoon in the embassy gardens. Jake wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. "I don't know what's real anymore," he admitted. "I feel her emotions through the bond. She feels mine. How do I know if what I'm feeling is actually love or just the bond confusing things?" "Jake, I've been watching you two work together on this humanitarian project. The way you both get excited when you solve a problem, the way you make each other laugh, the way you actually listen to each other, that's not the bond. That's genuine partnership." But success brought problems of its own. High Chancellor Vexel and his traditionalist faction hadn't forgotten their opposition to Jake. They saw his growing influence with the princess as dangerous. Rumors began spreading through the court that the human was manipulating Saraith, using the bond to control her decisions. Some Valeth began calling for Jake's expulsion, saying he was a spy for humanity. The more extreme voices suggested that the bond itself was a human trick, that Jake had somehow forced it to form to gain access to Valeth secrets. 6 months into the year, The situation exploded. Jake was walking through the palace gardens in the evening, thinking about a problem with the supply chain for the border colonies. He didn't notice the three masked figures until they grabbed him from behind. The bond flared with alarm. Through it, Sarah felt his panic instantly. Jake tried to fight back, using the self-defense training all Space Corps officers received, but there were three of them, and they were strong. He heard running footsteps and Sarah's voice shouting commands. Royal guards poured into the garden and the attackers were surrounded within moments. They dropped Jake and tried to run but didn't get far. Sarah reached Jake as he was getting to his feet, brushing dirt from his clothes. Without thinking, she grabbed his shoulders, checking him for injuries. Through the bond, he felt her terror and fury. "I'm okay," he said quickly. "They didn't really hurt me." "They tried to kidnap you," she said, her voice shaking. "If I hadn't felt your fear through the bond." The attackers were brought before Emperor Kareth for questioning. Under interrogation, they confessed everything. They had been hired by members of Vexal's faction, nobles who believed that removing Jake would somehow break the bond and free Saraeth to marry a proper Valeth. The revelation created a scandal in the court. Several nobles were arrested and Vexal himself was forced to publicly deny knowledge of the plot. But the damage was done. The traditionalist faction's attempt to harm Jake had backfired, making him a sympathetic figure instead of a suspicious outsider. That night, Saraeth came to Jake's quarters. It was the first time she had visited his private space. She looked exhausted and scared. "This is my fault," she said, sitting heavily in a chair. "I brought you into this world, and now you're a target." "I chose to stay," Jake reminded her. "Nobody forced me. But you're in danger because of me. Those people wanted to hurt you because you're connected to me." Jake moved to sit across from her. "Saraeth, listen. These past 6 months I've learned more than I ever imagined about your people and your world. Yeah, there are problems and dangers, but there's also beauty and wonder and possibility. You've shown me all of that." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I don't regret being here. I don't regret the bond." He reached out and took her hand. The bond flared at the touch, stronger than ever. "These months working with you on the Border Colony project, learning about your culture, seeing how hard you work to make things better for everyone, I've realized something." "What?" she asked quietly. "I'm not just staying because of the bond anymore, I'm staying because I want to. Because working with you, building something together, it matters to me. You matter to me." Through the bond, he felt her emotions shift. Surprise, hope, and something warmer that made his heart beat faster. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "At first, the bond was something that happened to us, something we had to deal with. But now, when I think about the future, I can't imagine facing it without you. Not because of the bond, but because you've become my partner, my friend." "More than friends?" Jake asked carefully. Saraeth smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her in days. "Maybe. We still have 6 months to figure that out." But they both knew something had shifted between them. The bond was still there, but it had become less important than the genuine connection they had built through shared work and mutual respect. The humanitarian initiative continued to grow. Jake and Saraeth traveled to several border colonies together, seeing the results of their work firsthand. On one agricultural world, they met farmers, both human and Valeth, who were working side by side for the first time. On a mining colony, they saw families from both species sharing resources and helping each other. The success was undeniable. News of the project spread through both empires, and public opinion began to shift. More people started seeing the potential in human-Valeth cooperation rather than fearing it. But 8 months into the year, disaster struck again. They were on a human colony called Frontier Station, participating in a public forum about the resource-sharing program. The marketplace was crowded with colonists, both human and Valeth, all eager to hear about the project's success. Jake never saw the bomb. One moment he was answering questions from. The final 4 months of the year should have been peaceful, a time for Jake and Saraeth to make their decision without pressure. Instead, everything fell apart at once. Emperor Kareth collapsed during a council meeting, The palace physicians rushed to his chambers, and within hours the terrible truth spread through the court. The emperor was dying. He had been fighting a degenerative illness for years, hiding it from all but his closest advisors. Now his body was finally giving up. The news created chaos. Suddenly, the question of who would succeed him became urgent. Saraeth was the rightful heir, but half the council saw her as compromised by her bond with a human. Prince Davith, her cousin, immediately began gathering support from traditionalist factions. High Chancellor Vexal wasted no time. He called an emergency council session to discuss appointing an interim regent. Everyone knew he intended to support Davith, sidelining Saraeth and almost certainly forcing Jake to leave Valeth Prime. "You have to fight this," Jake urged as they stood in Saraeth's chambers. Outside, the palace buzzed with whispered conversations and political maneuvering. "If I push for the throne now, it could start a civil war," Saraeth replied. Through the bond, Jake felt her exhaustion and despair. "Half the Empire already thinks I'm being manipulated by you. They'll never accept me as Empress while I'm bonded to a human. So you're just going to let Davith take what's rightfully yours? I'm going to prevent my people from killing each other over a power struggle." Jake wanted to argue, but he understood her position. She would rather step aside than see the Empire torn apart. It was one of the things he loved about her, even if it frustrated him. Ambassador Walsh arrived with more bad news from Earth. "The situation is deteriorating on our side too. There are factions in Earth's government who see the Emperor's illness as an opportunity to expand into Valeth space while they're vulnerable. If you two don't make a strong decision soon, we could be looking at war instead of alliance." "What do you mean?" Saraeth asked. "I mean your personal choice has become a political necessity," Walsh said bluntly. "If you marry, it shows commitment to peace. If you separate, it signals weakness and uncertainty. Either way, you need to decide now, not when your year officially ends." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood on his balcony, staring at the 3 alien moons and thinking about everything he had sacrificed to come here. His career, his home, his entire life on Earth. Was he really ready to make it permanent? Through the bond, he felt Saraeth awake as well, wrestling with her own doubts. "Can't sleep?" Her thought came clearly. Their mental communication had improved dramatically over the months. "Too much thinking," Jake replied. "Meet me in the royal garden." The garden was dark except for the soft blue glow of bioluminescent flowers. Saraeth was already there, wearing a simple robe instead of her formal princess attire. She looked tired and scared. "I spoke with my father," she said without preamble. "He's dying, Jake, days, maybe a week. And he told me something I needed to hear." "What?" "That he doesn't care what choice I make about us as long as it's mine. He said the Empire needs a leader who chooses their own path, not one who follows tradition blindly." Saraeth's voice cracked. "He gave me permission to be selfish. What do you want?" Jake asked. "I want to choose you. I want to choose us, this impossible bond that's become the most important thing in my life." She turned to face him. "But Jake, if we marry, you'll never really go home again. You'll be consort to the Valeth throne, surrounded by politics and danger for the rest of your life. And if war comes despite everything we've done, you could end up on the opposite side from your own people. And if we separate, then we both go back to our duties. You return to Earth as a hero, a symbol of peace. I take the throne and try to lead toward alliance instead of isolation. We'd still have the bond, still feel each other across the distance, but we'd be free to live separate lives." "That sounds terrible," Jake said honestly. Saraeth laughed despite her tears. "It really does." Jake stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. "I've been thinking about what Walsh said about how our choice affects more than just us. But you know what? I don't care." "What do you mean?" "I mean, yes, I care about peace and our peoples and all of that. But I refuse to base the most important decision of my life purely on politics." He squeezed her hands. "Saraeth, I've spent almost a year watching you lead, learning who you are beyond the bond. You're going to be an amazing empress with or without me, and Earth will survive whether I come home or not. But you and me? We're once in a lifetime. I'm not walking away from that. Even if it costs you everything, you are everything," Jake said simply. The bond exploded with emotion as Saraeth kissed him. It was their first real kiss after nearly a year of careful boundaries. The bioluminescent flowers around them flared bright enough to light up the entire garden. "So that's a yes?" Jake asked when they finally pulled apart. That's a yes, Saraith confirmed, but we're doing this my way. Not because tradition demands it, not because politics require it. We're getting married because we choose each other, and we're going to build something new, a partnership that truly bridges our worlds. The next morning, Saraith requested an emergency session of the High Council. With Jake standing beside her, she addressed the assembled nobles and politicians. I claim the throne not as my father's daughter, but as a leader who has proven herself, she declared, her voice strong and clear. I've passed the trial of shared suffering. I've brought peace to our border worlds. I've survived assassination attempts and terrorist attacks. I've formed an alliance with humanity that benefits both our peoples. And I've found a partner who complements my strengths and challenges my weaknesses. She paused, looking around the chamber. If proven capability isn't worthy of the throne, then perhaps the throne itself needs to change. The challenge was clear. Either accept her and Jake together, or admit that the Empire valued tradition over actual achievement. High Chancellor Vexal stood to protest, but Councillor Mirieth cut him off. The princess is right. What has Prince Davith accomplished compared to her? What has any of us accomplished that matches bringing two species together? She's bonded to a human. Vexal shouted. Yes, and that bond has brought us prosperity and peace, Mirieth countered. Our border colonies are thriving. Trade with humanity has increased. Princess Saraith has done more for this empire in 1 year than most rulers do in a lifetime. The debate raged for hours, but in the end, even Vexal couldn't argue against results. The council agreed to accept Saraith as heir, with one condition. Jake would have to pass a series of leadership trials to prove he understood Valeth governance well enough to serve as consort. Jake passed every test. He drew on everything he had learned over the past year, using the bond to access Saraith's knowledge when needed. By the time Emperor Kareth died peacefully 2 weeks later, there was no question about the succession. The coronation ceremony was like nothing either empire had ever seen. Saraith was crowned empress in the traditional way, but Jake's role was different. Instead of being subordinate, he stood as an equal partner. The vows were modified to reflect their unique bond, emphasizing mutual respect and shared leadership. Ambassador Walsh stood in the crowd, openly crying. Captain Grant had returned with a delegation from Earth, including Jake's parents. His mother wept when she saw her son crowned consort to an alien empress, while his father looked proud and confused in equal measure. In his speech after the coronation, Jake addressed the gathered crowd from both empires. A year ago, I gave my blood to save a life. I didn't know it would change my fate forever. Today, I give my life to a larger purpose, building a future where humans and Valeth stand together not out of necessity, but out of genuine partnership and respect. He took Saraith's hand. I'll make mistakes. I'll face opposition. I'm just a human from a small town in Kansas who somehow ended up here. But I'll face everything with the most remarkable person I've ever met by my side. Saraith addressed the crowd next. We stand at the beginning of a new era. An era where old divisions no longer define us, where blood bonds become bridges instead of barriers. My consort and I will lead by example, showing both our peoples what becomes possible when we choose unity over isolation, love over fear, and courage over tradition. The response was mixed. Some cheered while others remained silent, uncertain about this strange new future. But as Jake and Saraith stood together on the royal platform, the bond between them stronger than ever, they knew they had made the right choice. Later that night, exhausted from the day's ceremonies, they finally had a moment alone in their shared chambers. It was strange to think these rooms were now theirs, that they would live here together as rulers of an empire. Any regrets? Saraith asked, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the 3 moons rise. Jake thought about Earth, about the life he'd left behind, about how impossible this all should have been. Then he felt the bond humming between them, not as a chain but as a choice they had made together. Not even one, he said. You, only that I didn't meet you sooner. Through the palace windows they could see the crystal city spreading below them, lights beginning to glow as night fell. Tomorrow would bring